Hello, everyone. I'm wanting to catch up with some of the videos over a lot of the works that we have read since fall break, and I haven't had a chance to make videos about. So hopefully, I'll be dropping several here pretty soon. Uh, last work that we read that I haven't made a video on was F. Scott Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby, which is one of the second of the two novels we're reading this semester. The crash course videos that I uploaded in the PowerPoints, I think are very good about analyzing Gatsby. John Green does a really good job with those videos, so make sure that you watch those. Fitzgerald, I think, with The Great Gatsby wrote what in my mind is the great American novel. I mean, that you'll get people who will argue for Huckleberry Finn and a few others, but when I hear that term great American novel, if it's, that metaphorical thing that, you sometimes hear about, I think of The Great Gatsby as that. We'll talk about Faulkner here soon. I think Faulkner's a better writer, but Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby, I think, is our great American novel. And one of the big themes in it, you kind of see it, it's a good representation of its time period of the Roaring Twenties. It almost, even though it was written before the stock market crash, it kind of almost predicts it, as John Green mentions in his video. It's a very much, these people are living, extremely, with a lot of outlandish parties. Gatsby's party is just a great representation of American excess and, not thinking about tomorrow and that whole image, the Valley of Ashes with the optometrist eyes on the billboard looking over it like it's the eyes of God. That is kind of what is to come. That is like, the depression in the future that is to come. But Fitzgerald, he's a very infamous figure in American literature. He and his wife Zelda, who greatly helped him, inspired him to write The Great Gatsby. They are, characters themselves nearly as well as the characters that Fitzgerald created. They lived life to its fullest, and ultimately both of them, had, very tragic endings and very short lives relatively because of excesses like alcoholism, and that ultimately is what kills Fitzgerald. But I did kind of want to just kind of briefly talk about the novel. You have in the novel Nick Carraway. He's our narrator. He's not really the main character, though. The main character is, of course, Gatsby, and Carraway is just an observer. That kind of makes the novel pretty significant right there. And Gatsby is he was once fairly poor, and he had fallen in love with the future Daisy Buchanan, who was of high society, and he fell in love with her. They had a kind of whirlwind romance, and then it kind of got ended. He had to go off to war, and then he is trying. A lot of this novel is about him trying to recapture that past that you really can't get back. Once things have occurred, they're over, and that's something that Jay Gatsby can't really ever fully comprehend too well or come to accept. And the novel is a lot about him. He kind of ignores the fact that Daisy's now married. He ignores the fact that Daisy has a child. All he is obsessed with is that he wants Daisy to be in love with him like she once was. And really probably never was actually the way probably more like he remembers her being. And so that's his desire. Um, she's married, of course, to Tom Buchanan, who is just class A jerk. Um, he is from a wealthy family. He is pretty racist. When we first are introduced to him, he's telling Nick about this book that he's read. That's just basically it's kind of a forerunner for Nazism nearly basically is what he's been reading, but Buchanan was kind of, he is what Daisy married into, old money, and what Jay Gatsby can never be because he had to go and find his fortune. He's not from an aristocratic family like Tom is. Um, that's a major theme of Fitzgerald's work is, ambition, lineage to a certain extent, and just, the pursuit of wealth, status, fame, and the luxuries that that comes with. Let's see, a few lines I wanted to point out here. Um, on page 668, early in the novel, Daisy gives her aspirations for her daughter, and it kind of reveals a lot about Daisy and her outlook on on her life, what she thinks a woman is capable of. On page 668, she says, I'm glad it's a girl, and I hope she'll be a fool. That's the best thing a girl can be in this world, a beautiful little fool. That's a famous line there, in reference to, just kind of Daisy, her acceptance of her lot in life. Um, Let me see, a few other, um, on page 670, we have the introduction at the end of chapter one and beginning of chapter two of two of the major symbols of the novel. At the end of chapter one, it talks about the single green light that kind of represents Gatsby's longing for Daisy and all she represents to him, that he sees across the lake. And then at the beginning of chapter two, on that same page, it talks about the Valley of Ashes. And that's nearby where Myrtle Wilson will ultimately be killed and what will ultimately be the downfall of Gatsby, and kind of is a representation of how this is all going to come to an end. And it's, again, almost foreshadowing how the Roaring Twenties are going to come to a screeching halt there in a few years later. Um, let's see. In chapter three, we have a good description as um, Nick comes to one of Gatsby's great parties, outlandish parties. We find out exactly, what those parties are like, how excessive they are. Um, on page 679, Nick says, I believe that on the first night I went to Gatsby's house, I was one of the few guests who had actually been invited. It's just a huge, excessive party. There's all sorts of rumors floating about who Gatsby is, how he got this wealth. On page 681, there is the mention that somebody told me they thought he killed a man once. They're talking about, the host until ultimately Nick runs into Gatsby, not even realizing who he is. Um, and he says, and I like large parties. Or, well, no, that's Jordan who introduces Nick to Gatsby. She is kind of an interesting character as well. She is exactly the opposite of what Nick aspires to be. So it's kind of an interesting thing that they get kind of pushed together as a couple. It just kind of shows how Nick is really uncomfortable in all of this. How it's not nothing that's natural for him. How he sees the facade of it, and that Nick is kind of our way of viewing this, and he is in a relationship with Jordan, and Jordan who is not honest, and yet that is what Nick says he values the most. Um, let's see. On page 688, Nick refers to Jordan Baker as incurably dishonest. And at the end of that chapter, he says, I'm one of the few honest people that I've ever known. So she is not what Nick, aspires to, to be part of in life, but yet that's what his time here with Gatsby and the Buchanans and Jordan Baker is like for him. Just kind of an interesting side note here. Those of you who might be baseball fans, and it's that time of year. On page 696, I don't know if everybody caught that, but Mayor Wolf, Mayor Wolfsheim he is declared by Gatsby as being the man who fixed the World Series back in 1919, referencing the Black Sox scandal with Shoeless Joe Jackson, all of them. So if you're a baseball fan, it's kind of interesting. Um, Finally, since the video is getting a little bit long here, I did want to point out that the ending of the novel that I think is some of the best writing of American literature. Right there, those last um, couple of paragraphs. And as I sat there brooding on the old unknown world, I thought of Gatsby's wonder when he first picked out the green light at the end of Daisy's dock. He had come a long way to this blue line, and his dream must have seemed so close that he could hardly fail to grasp it. He did not know that it was already behind him, somewhere back in that vast obscurity beyond the city, where the dark fields of the Republic rolled on under the night. Gatsby believed in the green light, the orgastic future that year by year recedes before us. It eluded us then, but that's no matter. Tomorrow we will run faster, stretch out our arms farther, and one fine morning. So we beat on, boats against the current, borne back ceaselessly into the past. So I hope you enjoyed the Great Gatsby. I think it's a wonderful piece of literature. And uh, again, if you have any questions about anything going on in the class, just shoot me an email. But I hope to be posting a few more videos here very soon. Thank you.